TFA fam, welcome back in. We are already on to week 5. We have our top 24 running back ranking. So without further ado, let's just dive right in, talk about our top 12 running backs for week 5. Up at the top, we have Christian McCaffrey, followed by Bijan Robinson, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, Tony Pollard, Brian Robinson Jr., Travis Etienne Jr., David Montgomery, DeAndre Swift, Devon Achan, and Alvin Kamara rounding out our top 12. Kev, who are some of the guys that you are excited about, or some of these guys in the RB1 range that you think the folks should know about?
I think you got to start off by talking about Saquon Barkley. Hopefully, he is back this week. He did return to practice last week, and I think he trends towards playing this week against Miami. Now, on paper, it is a really good matchup. Miami has struggled against the run this season. They've allowed the ninth most rushing yards, the seventh most rushing touchdowns, and the ninth most fantasy points to running back. So this is a really good matchup for Saquon as long as he returns. Now, obviously, next up, let's talk about Travis Etienne. Now, Travis Etienne right now is dispelled all the rumors that Tank Bigsby was ever going to become a thing. He is handling 77% of the snaps, 62% of the RB rush attempts, and 65% of the routes with a very healthy 11% target share. He's also 15th in yards created per touch, 24th in yards per route run, and he has run the second most routes among all running backs. And he is breaking a tackle every 6.9 attempts, which is top 10 among all running backs. He's 18th fantasy points per game. And great news for this offensive line. They should get left tackle Cam Robinson, should be reinstated this week. So that should also really help this offensive line as well. Now, this week they get Buffalo. Now, a lot of people are going to look at Buffalo and think this is a bad matchup. On the contrary, my friend, they have actually allowed the 12th most rushing yards and the 12th most fantasy points to running backs, or the 10th highest explosive run rate to running backs as well on the season. So this is actually a really good matchup for Travis Etienne, and this is going to be another one of those international games early in the morning. So Travis Etienne is in a fantastic spot this week against the Buffalo Bills, and then DeAndre Swift. Now this isn't a great matchup. The Rams have actually allowed the ninth fewest fantasy points per game to running backs, as well as the 18th most rushing yards on the season. But DeAndre Swift has been matchup proof so far this season. Now, there are some concerns. We'll talk about that in a second. But on the surface, he's done a great job. He's running behind one of the best offensive lines, if not the best offensive line in the league. 56% of the snaps, 42% of the RB carries, and 16% target per route run rate. He's also averaging 15.3 fantasy points per game, which is 12th most among all running backs. And his 6.3 true yards per carry is second most among all running backs. Now, some of the concern I have is his target share. Only a 9% target share on the season and a 46.2% route participation, which is 21st among all running backs. He's not really getting the volume in terms of the passing game. And eventually, some of this efficiency is going to slow down. And if he doesn't score a touchdown, he's going to start to become a little bit more touchdown dependent. He's been super explosive. I would like to see him be a little bit more involved in the passing game. But this is a problem we've seen going all the way back to last year they just do not target running backs out of the back. Overall, I still think this is a great spot for DeAndre Swift. Game script is going to be in their favor. Next up, let's talk about David Montgomery against Carolina. Week 4, the man played 70% of the snaps, handled 76% of the rush attempts, and ran 52% of the routes with a 8% target share. I don't know why they hate Jahmyr Gibbs as much as they do, considering at draft day they were pounding the damn table for him, but they just do not seem to really want to unleash him at all. And this is a great matchup, though, for David Montgomery. Third most rushing yards allowed, second most touchdowns, and the fifth most fantasy points allowed to running backs on the season. And this is with David Montgomery missing a week. He is 11th in rushing yards. He's fifth in touchdowns. And he's also averaging 20.5 fantasy points per game, which was fifth most. And the Lions are sixth in rush attempts per game. So this is all great news. And exactly what we thought about, we talked about Jamal Williams, is exactly what he's getting. He has the second most carries inside the 5, and 4 of his 5 touchdowns have come from inside the 5-yard line, just like Jamal Williams last year. So he is doing all the things that Jamal Williams does. But the thing is, David Montgomery is a much better running back and a much better player than Jamal Williams is. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is going to continue to see the pass catching work here in this offense, but David Montgomery is going to see the lion's share of the touches from this backfield, at least for the time being, even despite the fact that he hasn't been ultra efficient. He's only 39th in yards created per touch, but he is 11th in evaded tackles. So now next up, Brian Robinson makes his first debut inside our top 12, and rightfully so. They play Chicago. He's only playing 54% of the snaps, but he's handling 76% of the rush attempts and 31% of the routes. Now, he only is only seeing 5% target share, so he's basically just that in between the tackles grinder right now. But I will say this: I'm going to eat a little crow, and I'm going to take an L on Brian Robinson at this point because he has been pretty fantastic. He is 11th in fantasy points per game. He is 18th in fantasy points per opportunity. But the one problem I did not like about him last year, he was incredibly inefficient. That has been the complete opposite so far through the first 4 games. He is 11th in yards created per touch, 13th in evaded tackles, 12th in breakaway run rate, and he has a 1.63 yards per route run, which is excellent. That is top 12 among all running backs. And he's also 12th in carries inside the 5 yard. Now, Chicago, like I mentioned, 11th most rushing yards allowed, 6th most touchdowns, and 3rd most fantasy points per game to running backs. Elite matchup for Brian Robinson. And lastly, I cannot go without talking about Devon Achane. Last week, he handled 66% of the snaps, 47% of the rush attempts, and 68% of the routes for a very good 13% target share. His numbers are off the charts now. Some of this is because of the monster day he had a couple weeks ago, but he is first in yards created per touch. He has an 8.7 true yards per carry, which is obviously first among all running backs, first in breakaway run rate, third in juke rate, and he is a 3.09 yards per route run, which is first among all running backs. And now this is a great matchup against the Giants, who allow the 4th most rushing yards, the 3rd most rushing touchdowns, and the 10th most fantasy points to the running back position. And oh yeah, Devon Achane is also averaging 26.7 fantasy points per game. Achane is absolutely crushing.
Yeah, we've seen him do it both ways, right? Last week, I think he only had 11 touches, and the week before he had close to 20, I believe. So we've seen him do it on volume. We've seen him do it without volume. It's just a wild situation there in that running back group. And then Jeff Wilson going to be coming back at some point too, which I'm sure is going to throw a wrench into things. But I think he's here to stay. I think it's legit. I don't think there's any way you can really set him at this point if you are Miami. But let's go ahead and move on to our RB2s for the week. We have Joe Mixon kicking it off at RB13, followed by Aaron Jones, James Cook, Brees Hall, Kyron Williams, Isaiah Pacheco, James Conner, Alexander Madison, Raheem Mostert at RB21, Jonathan Taylor making his 2023 debut in our rankings, Damian Pierce, and then Khalil Herbert at 24. Kev, same deal. Who are some of these RB2s that folks should know about?
Let's talk about Aaron Jones. They get the Raiders this week. Now, he only played 34% of the snaps, but he handled 45% of the rush attempts and 29% of the routes with only a 6% target share, which is a little concerning. But last week was kind of a weird game against the Lions. The Lions actually have one of the best defenses in the league right now. And I do think obviously better days are coming for Aaron Jones. And let's face it, AJ Dillon is fucking terrible. Like, he is absolutely dreadful. Not anything to
Cheeks.
even worry about whatsoever. He's absolute cheeks. And I mean, he's right there with Joshua Kelly. They are fighting for the least inefficient and the most terrible running back right now in the league. I mean, both those guys are just absolutely awful. So Aaron Jones is 14th in fantasy points per game, but he is also 4th in fantasy points per opportunity. And he gets a great matchup against the Raiders. They've allowed the 8th most rushing yards and the 13th most fantasy points per game on the season. So Aaron Jones is in an elite spot on Monday Night Football. So I do really like Aaron Jones this week in a pretty big bounce back spot. Next up, let's talk about Kyron Williams. And I'm a little bit concerned with Kyron Williams, and I'll talk about why. Despite the fact that he's handling 84% of the snaps and 74% of the rush attempts and 83% of the routes run is what's carrying him right now, because he hasn't really been all that efficient as a runner. He is 40th in true yards per carry on the season, which is a little concerning. And this is not a good matchup for running backs. You can throw the ball against Philadelphia. You cannot run the ball against Philadelphia. They've allowed the 3rd fewest rushing yards and the 4th fewest fantasy points per game. But where they have struggled is, like I said, they have allowed the 12th most receiving yards and the 13th most receptions. So I think if Kyron Williams, who's averaging 20.4 fantasy points per game, is going to come through, I think it's going to have to be through the air. Now, obviously, he's running 83% of the routes. But one thing that could be interesting here is going to see is if Cooper Kupp is able to return, then I do think that could limit Kyron Williams some. But either way, I don't think Kyron Williams is going to get there on the ground. He hasn't been efficient as a runner, but he's been really good as a receiver. So if he can see his normal targets, then I think Kyron Williams can be fine. It can be a usable RB2, but this is not a good matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles. Let's move over to Isaiah Pacheco, who is coming off probably his best game of his short 2-year career. Week 4, he played 63% of the snaps, he had 65% of the rush attempts, and ran 42% of the routes with a very healthy 20% target per route run rate. He was top 12. He's been top 12 in each of the last 2 weeks with 16 and 25 PPR points. On the season, he is RB16 in fantasy points per game. And he's also 20th in fantasy points per opportunity. He is 20th in yards created per touch, 8th in yards per route run, and 11th in breakaway run rate. And one of the most positive things about him is a lot of the narrative around him this year was Was he going to be utilized in the red zone because that was Jerick McKinnon's role? He is actually top 5 in red zone touches on the season among all running backs. So that is a positive. This isn't necessarily the best matchup. The Vikings have allowed the 15th most rushing yards with the 10th fewest rushing touchdowns to running backs, but I still think within this Chiefs offense, you really just can't focus on the run and really shut down the run. And I don't think that's something they're going to be doing. So that's always going to open things up for Isaiah Pacheco. So I think Isaiah Pacheco is a really strong RB2 again this week, and he is really starting to kind of take over this backfield and really could be one of the biggest steals of the draft season. So really like Isaiah Pacheco. Let's talk about Jonathan Taylor really quickly. I'm not sure if he's going to play or not. He is expected back at practice this week, and he does have a shot to play. But this is a very bad matchup against the Titans. This is one of the worst matchups you could possibly face. The Titans have allowed the fourth fewest rushing yards, the sixth fewest touchdowns, and the fifth fewest fantasy points to running backs. Plus, you have to factor in Jonathan Taylor has not done anything in training camp, didn't do anything in preseason. I would expect at the very least he's probably going to have maybe a limited role. I don't think he's going to come out and handle his normal touches, his majority of the touches from this backfield. So I would have limited expectations for him this week. If you have better options, maybe you look to sit him if he does in fact suit up this week against the Tennessee Titans. Let's move over to Breece Hall, and I think Breece Hall, this could be a breakout week for Breece Hall. Dalvin Cook is clearly dust. Like Dalvin Cook is an absolute zero. And we've started to see Breece Hall trend up a little bit. He is handling 44% opportunity share with a 9.2% target share. He's only averaging 7.6 fantasy points per game, but some of that's been a lot of problem with them getting blown out earlier in the year. But we know the Denver defense is absolutely dreadful. They just make Justin Fields look like an elite quarterback throwing the football last week. And the Denver Broncos they are first in rushing yards allowed, touchdowns allowed, and fantasy points allowed to running backs. So this is an elite spot. Breece Hall is second in yards per touch, 21st in evaded tackles, and fifth in juke rate. So Breece Hall is in an elite spot this week, and I am firing him up with confidence. I haven't loved him before, but I think this is really a spot that he could absolutely go off and start to take over this backfield like he should because, boys, Dalvin Cook ain't it.
Yeah, man, I'm with you. Obviously, some of Denver's stats against are influenced by the absolute thumping they took to the Miami Dolphins a couple weeks ago. But I completely agree, man. I have Brees Hall a little bit higher than you do. I have him just outside of RB1 range for all the things you mentioned. We've also seen his snap share start to tick up the past couple of weeks. The first 2 weeks, he's around like 30% of the snaps. The past 2 weeks, he's been around like 40-ish%. Like you said, Cook last week was what, 5 for 16 on the ground, and Brees Hall was like 6 for 56, I believe. So I think this is where we start to see him take off.
Lastly, I just want to move over to some RB3s that I want to hit on really quickly and highlight. Obviously, I know if you're saying this, you're probably wondering, so you don't have to put it in the comments. You're wondering where Ramondre Stevenson is, where Miles Sanders is. Miles Sanders, I really don't want to play unless I have to. Now, you may be forced to because of bye weeks and other situations, but this is a really bad matchup. We need to start taking notice of this Detroit Lions defense because it is very, very good. And they have been elite against the run. They have only allowed 45.3 rushing yards per game. It's the second lowest rate in the league, and they've allowed the sixth fewest fantasy points to running backs. Miles Sanders has been not very good. He's only averaging 10.7 fantasy points per game. Where he has come in clutch, which is surprising because this is the issue that we didn't know about, or the issue that he had in Philadelphia, is his 15.3% target share, which is seventh highest among all running backs. That is what's made him fantasy relevant because he's done absolutely nothing on the ground. So I don't love this matchup against Detroit. So I have him as an RB3 this week. Same with Ramondre Stevenson. It's just really hard to trust him right now. He has not played very well. The offense isn't playing well right now. I think both of those guys are more RB3s for me this week. And then I do want to hit on Gus Edwards really quickly. This is a tale of two things because Gus Edwards is in a great spot right now. This is a great matchup. Pittsburgh has allowed the second most rushing yards and the sixth most fantasy points to running backs, but Gus Edwards just hasn't been very good. I mean, despite last week playing 71% of the snaps and handling 50% of the rush attempts and 56% of the routes run last week, he still only scored 6.9 fantasy points. And what should have been a good matchup for them or a decent matchup, especially with a game script that you would have thought he could have done a little bit more, but he just didn't. So I do think he's worth a flex option because of the matchup that they're in, but he's not somebody that I'm just absolutely in love with. And I did want to take a moment as a couple other options that you could be looking to play. Jaleel McLaughlin, somebody that I do like as well. We'll have to monitor Javonte Williams. I'm not 100% sure if he's going to play right now. Right now, it's he could possibly play, but he could also miss a week or two. But McLaughlin was really good last week, 19.4 fantasy points last week. Once Javante went down, he had 104 total yards and 11 touches. And the Jets have struggled against the run, seventh most rushing yards and 11th most fantasy points to running backs. And this should be a game where game script is also in his favor to be able to run the football. And let's be honest, Samaje P. Ryan has been ass. I mean, he just has not been very good whatsoever. And then lastly, I'm just going to slide in a couple of names for you. Some players that I would be looking to pick up before this week, and that is Emery DiMarcado. He has been trending up. I actually have him as a top 36 running back this week. I'm going to be the only person in the industry that has him that high, but his all of his touches have started to trend up. He's utilizing the passing game. He saw 4 targets last week, and somebody that I'm really keeping an eye on in a matchup that they should be in against Cincinnati. But really, Emery DiMarcado is somebody that I'm really looking to add because I think a breakout could be coming for him.
That is going to do it for the week 5 running back rankings. Hit us with a sub and a like if you have yet to do so. Any questions, you can go ahead and drop them in the comments below, or you can join our absolutely free fantasy football Discord. Link will be in the description below. Good luck in week 5, and we'll talk to you soon.